Hi class. In this short video I just want to talk about the research paper outline that I'm posting on the course homepage and walk you through what it is that I'm asking you to do for this. So this is basically just a guideline, an outline of what I expect to be included in your research paper. You can follow this outline as a way to sort of guide your sections in the paper and also keep track of any sources or key ideas that you want to include in your essay. So we've already kind of filled out this part within our first assignment in the class. I asked you to pick a research topic, and it was a broad topic. Usually, a lot of you came up with really good ideas. There was, you know, teenage pregnancy, harm reduction, eating disorders, um, nursing burnout, a bunch of different ideas that you guys came up with. So you can rewrite that here, so your broad topic is fine. And then I'm asking for specific research questions. So these are really, we did that mind mapping exercise. So is there a branch of that mind map that you were narrowing your focus to? And can you frame that interest as a question? So here I give you the example. So are there any negative outcomes of teenage pregnancy? That's kind of a guiding research question for this person who wants to learn more about that topic. Or the other one, what is harm reduction and is it effective? So again, that might be one of the guiding questions that a student might have, and they want to learn more about that. So just write, one or two questions that you might use as the guiding questions of your research project. And then the first sort of section of your paper is going to be the introduction. You don't have to do an abstract for this research paper. You can just do an introductory paragraph that provides some information. And I have a separate video where I talk about introductions and how to write an effective introduction paragraph. But I'll just remind you here, so an introduction should have a hook, so you should be engaging your reader right from the start. It should include any background information that the reader needs in order to understand the topic. You might introduce any key terms or concepts, include definitions of any main ideas that you're presenting. So you could assume that your reader maybe has a little bit of information, but you want to make sure that any sort of larger concepts or ideas that are not common knowledge are introduced and defined. So imagine you're, maybe discussing this topic with a family member and you have to sort of introduce it to them. And then your introduction should include a thesis statement, and there should be a kind of clear outline of your key findings within that introduction. So the thesis statement is your argument or the main purpose of your research paper. And when I mean outline of your key points, you should I should be able to read your intro and have a clear idea of what the rest of the paper is going to talk about. If I read your introduction and have sort of no clear idea of what the rest of this paper is going to be organized as or what you're going to talk about, then you're not doing a very sort of clear job of outlining your key findings in your intro. So for your thesis statement, this is where you're going to basically identify the purpose of your research paper, and it's going to be basically what you've learned about this topic following from your research. So here I just said, in your thesis statement, following from your research, what can you say with some certainty to be true about your topic? And what does the research say is the answer to your research question above? So you can use, the questions as a kind of bouncing off point for your thesis statement. And you can reframe your question. So if your question is, are there any negative outcomes of teenage pregnancy? Your thesis might be, the negative outcomes of teenage pregnancy are, and then have blank, blank, and blank as your key ideas. So you could use that as a way to sort of organize your paper as well. You might state your 3 points or your major findings within the thesis statement or immediately after your thesis statement. Usually your introductory paragraph leads into the thesis. The thesis is usually near the bottom of the introduction paragraph, not usually at the beginning. And then after your intro, you're going to have your research findings. And this is the main section of your research paper. So this is where you would include all of the data, the quotations, the supporting evidence, the facts and figures that you've found from doing your research. So if you had charts or graphs or anything like that, you would put that within your research findings. And then I'm asking you to organize your research findings. So depending on your topic, there can be sort of different ways to structure research findings in ways that are logical and sort of sequential. So you must decide how you want to organize your research findings in a coherent, logical way. For example, you might decide to organize your findings by a kind of problems and treatments or solutions, cause and effect, advantages and disadvantages, or a kind of for and against argument. So decide what structure you want to organize your findings in, and then you can pick one of these sort of larger structures in order to organize the rest of your paper. So I want you to identify which organizational strategy are you going to use, one of these ones that I listed above, in order to organize your research findings section. So if I was going to do, say, harm reduction and is it effective, I might identify harm reduction as one of the treatments or solutions, and then identify the problem first, and then include information about harm reduction as a treatment or solution. So if the problem is, drug abuse, that's going to be one part of my research findings, and I'll find information on in Canada, is drug abuse a problem in certain demographics, etc. I can include that in my paper, but I'm also going to find information about harm reduction strategy as a potential treatment or solution. So that'll be in another section of my research findings. So basically, yeah, you can plug in your topic under one of these kind of organizational strategies, and it will help frame or show a connection between all of your research findings. For teenage pregnancy, you might, this one is asking, are there any negative outcomes? So you might say, teenage pregnancy is a problem, but there are, ways to prevent it. So are there any possible interventions or solutions that we can come up with in order to prevent teenage pregnancy? So those are just some ideas for you to structure your research findings as a kind of two-sided argument. So it might be an issue, for or against, or advantages, disadvantages. So these are just some of the ways that you can structure your research findings. So your research findings will have two sections, and I've labeled them A and B. So A is maybe the problem and B is the solution, or section A will discuss the cause, and B will be the effect, or you have the for arguments and against arguments. So you just want to make sure that you have sort of two sections of your research findings. And then within each of these sections, you might have supporting points. So this is where you're going to put your individual research findings that you found in your article searches. So you might come up with one or two or three even supporting arguments for this section. And I've included places where you can list the source that you're going to use. So each supporting point needs to be sourced. It needs to have backing research to back it or support it. And you can decide where those sources are or what they are based on what you've researched, where you've researched. And same with the subsection B. Again, you'll have various points, and you can also include the sources that you've done in your research. And then when you're done your research section, so this is where you're putting all of the information that you've studied and learned from your article searches or your book searches or your internet searches. This is where all the data and statistics come. And then in your discussion section, so this is section number 3, this is where you actually kind of analyze and explain your point of view about this topic, having done the research that you've done. So now you're trying to sort of synthesize the information. So you can summarize and explain what you know to be true about this topic following from your research. You might recognize how you would implement the research into your practice, or explain how one side of the argument was more right and why, or how both sides of the issue are partially correct depending on specific context or individuals. So here you might say, you might come up with the sort of discussion topic. If you go back and you're kind of answering your questions now. So the negative outcomes of teenage pregnancy. Here you might say, this is your final sort of discussion about that topic. So what did you learn about that? And you can say that in your discussion section. You might say that of all the research that you've done, sexual education is the most crucial factor in preventing teenage pregnancy, or whatever it is. So you're kind of summarizing the main argument or what you've learned from doing the research in this section of your paper. And then your final paragraph is just a conclusion. It's kind of a more formal conclusion that sums up what your argument was, or what your thesis was, briefly restates the main findings, identifies any gaps or further questions regarding this topic, and also presents a kind of insight or reflection on how this research topic has a larger purpose or relevance in today's society, or for you and your peers or community. So it's more of a sort of broadening of the vision of your research topic and explaining why it was important or relevant to do. And then you'll have your reference page at the very end of your paper with all the sources that you've used in your research section listed at the very end. So that's basically the outline that you can use for your research paper. So your key sections here are going to be your introduction, your research findings, and then you'll divide those in a way that you see as logical and coherent and makes sense to you. So you'll have a research section, you'll have a discussion section where you reflect on the topic from a more knowledgeable perspective and having done the research, and you're kind of synthesizing the information and identifying how the most important points that you've come across, having done all that research. And then your conclusion, which basically just restates your main points, your thesis, and offers maybe a little bit broader reflection on how this research that you've done is relevant or needed in today's society. And then you'll have a reference section as well. So I'll just include that as well here. So we'll just put references at the edge here. So we'll make sure that references is also a section in your paper so you don't forget. Okay, so that's where you're going to list all of the sources that you've used within the paper itself. And you're also going to use in-text citations within the research findings section to indicate which research sources you've used within the paper itself. And those are going to be also listed at the end of your paper in the reference section.